There's a particular kind of pain that leaves no bruises, no blood, but it lingers for years. It's the pain of being shattered by someone who walks away like nothing happened. No apology, no remorse, not even a flicker of acknowledgement in their eyes, just silence. As if your suffering was disposable and your existence irrelevant. You replay the words, the looks, the moment you broke, and they just stared back blankly. You wonder, do they feel nothing? And then it hits you, maybe they never did. That realization cuts deeper than the hurt itself. But here's the real question, the one that claws at your soul long after the storm. How can someone cause pain, then sleep like a stone? Why do they walk away whole, while you are left piecing yourself together in the dark? The answer isn't simple. It's not just they're evil, it's structural, philosophical, psychological. The Stoics had a name for this kind of person. The one unmoved by destruction they cause. And modern psychology, from Freud to Jordan Peterson, helps us decode the machinery inside them. The weak ego dressed in superiority, the broken child who learned to harden into cruelty, the manipulator who rewrites reality to avoid accountability. What you'll hear in the following breakdowns isn't just about them. It's about you. Why you stayed. Why you still ache. Why their silence stings more than a scream ever could. And how to take your power back, not through revenge, but through clarity. The Stoic path does not mean letting pain slide. It means understanding it so deeply that it loses its hold over you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger." This is not a call to self-blame, but a call to transformation. You cannot heal in the same state of confusion that broke you. You must rise with weapons of wisdom. At Victory Stoic, we bring you that fire. Ancient philosophy fused with modern insight. In this new series, we're combining Stoic foundations with leading psychological voices, especially Dr. Jordan Peterson, to offer a sharper lens, a deeper view, and tools that actually work in the real world. If this message pierced something in you, like the video to help spread it further. Subscribe if you're ready to see pain not as a curse, but as a teacher. Share this with someone who's still bleeding from someone else's silence. Comment 1 if this topic hit home, or 0 if you're not fully with us yet. Your voice helps shape how we evolve this mission. If you want to share your story, drop it below. You don't need to write a novel, just the truth. Someone else might read it and realize they're not alone. This is not just content, it's a call to arms, the kind that doesn't scream but slices clean through illusion. Let's begin. Number 1. The Armor of Emptiness. Why the narcissist feels nothing. There's a kind of pain that leaves no bruise, no noise, just silence that haunts. It's when you break down in front of someone who caused the damage and they just watch. No shame, no guilt, nothing. As if your pain were an inconvenience, not a consequence. You sit with the wreckage. They walk away spotless. And that wreckage, what they left behind, isn't just emotional. It's existential. Because you realize this, they never intended to feel. The narcissist doesn't process pain, they erase it. Not because they're strong, but because they've built their identity to survive without emotion. Empathy would threaten the illusion of perfection. Guilt would suggest accountability. And both are unbearable for someone whose entire self-image is a house of cards held together by denial. Epictetus warned, "It is not things that disturb us, but our opinions about them." But narcissists don't have opinions about pain. They have policies. Ignore, deflect, dominate. Not from power, but from fragility. Feelings are dangerous to them because if they ever let one in, everything else might collapse. Kevin, 41, lives in Dallas, corporate, polished, charismatic. He cheated on his partner, lied, got caught. When confronted, he said flatly, "That's your emotional reaction. Don't pin it on me." Cold, measured, void. He didn't deny the act. He just refused to acknowledge the impact. His calm wasn't control, it was absence. Jordan Peterson explains, you either voluntarily face what terrifies you or you become a puppet to what you refuse to confront. The narcissist chose the second path. At some point, maybe in childhood, they learned that showing emotion meant losing power. So they adapted by amputating vulnerability. Not healing, just hiding. And over time they became masters at mistaking numbness for composure. Neuroscience supports this. A 2011 study in Journal of Neuroscience showed that narcissists exhibit reduced activity in the anterior insula, the part of the brain linked to emotional empathy. Translation: they don't feel less because they're evolved. They feel less because their system is trained to disconnect under threat. Your pain is noise they've learned to mute. But the cost is high. No growth. Because growth requires pain. Pain requires access to emotion. And that door's been welded shut. So they don't evolve, they repeat. Here's the hard truth. They're not ignoring you. They're avoiding themselves. Your pain reflects a mirror they refuse to look into. So they deflect, attack, gaslight, go silent, not to hurt you, but to not see them. So what do? Stop expecting depth from someone who lives on surfaces. You can't connect with what isn't connected. Don't explain, don't justify, don't beg. They're not listening, they're preserving a mask. And every plea from you only confirms their illusion that they are above and you are beneath. Instead, use what they fear: clarity. Daily practice, truth journaling, 1 sentence a night. You didn't care when I cried. She rewrote the facts to avoid blame. I kept hoping they'd feel. Clarity is power, not poetic, not pretty, just precise. And precision is how you start cutting the emotional cord. Understand, their silence isn't peace. It's paralysis. They aren't calm. They're emotionally sedated. And that's not strength. That's collapse in slow motion. Jordan Peterson again. People don't toughen by avoiding struggle. They break more easily. The narcissist is not immune. They are brittle, cracked inside. So they armor up and call it strength. But you're in the fire. You feel. You bleed. You rebuild. And that is where real Stoicism begins. Not in cold detachment, but in courageous exposure to the truth, without flinching. Stoic strength is not the absence of emotion. It's the refusal to be ruled by suppressed emotion. You are not weak because you hurt. You are powerful because you feel and still stand, because you don't need to be numb to survive. You just need to be clear to be free. Number 2, your pain is their proof of power. There's a moment you won't forget. Not the fight, not the betrayal, not even the silence. It's the moment they saw your pain and stayed. Not to help, not to reach out, but to watch, and worse, to feel satisfied. They didn't flinch when you broke. They didn't comfort you when you wept. They looked at your suffering and saw it as confirmation that they still held the crown. Your pain wasn't tragic to them, it was tactical. It meant the strings were still attached. It meant they still had reach. And that is the game narcissists play. Not love, not connection, domination. In their world, empathy is weakness, vulnerability is leverage, and tears are trophies. The more you react, the more they feel alive. Because what they crave isn't intimacy, it's influence. Think of their mindset like a throne room. They sit at the center, not because they earned it, but because they declared it. And everyone else is furniture. When you cry, scream, or plead, you become the jester they control. The moment you disengage, the moment your pain no longer feeds their ego, is the moment they feel dethroned. That's why they stay distant until you break. That's why they return when you've rebuilt. Not to reconnect, but to see if the leash is still there. Jordan Peterson puts it this way: you are not morally obligated to support someone else's delusion. Narcissists are addicted to the illusion that they are in control of other people's emotional weather. When that illusion breaks, when you stop responding with pain, they panic. Because now the mirror no longer reflects their image of superiority, and without that reflection, their false self crumbles. Meet Dana, 36, from Phoenix. She was in a long-term relationship with Mark, a man who always stayed calm when she was upset. The more she cried, the more composed he became. Not because he was peaceful, but because he was winning. He said things like, "You're overreacting," or "I don't have time for this." Every time she raised her voice, he lowered his, weaponizing calm like a blade. One day, she broke down on the kitchen floor, and he looked at her, not with concern, but with quiet triumph. That was the day she realized her pain was his crown. This is not rare, it's a pattern. Seneca warned, "He who has great power should use it lightly." The narcissist flips this. The moment they sense power over you, they double down, not out of strategy, but out of addiction. Power, for them, is not a responsibility. It's the only validation they believe in. Here's the paradox. They don't just want to win. They want to win at your expense. Because if you're weak, they're strong. If you're hurt, they're unshaken. If you're confused, they're wise. Their version of control needs a victim. And once you stop playing that role, they start unraveling. But here's the deeper layer. They don't know another way to connect. Somewhere along the way, they learned control equals safety, dominance equals love. It's a warped blueprint built from past pain. Maybe they were raised in chaos, maybe they were rewarded for emotional detachment, but regardless of the origin, they now seek not relationships, but regimes. So what can you do? Step 1. Take back your response. They can't wear the crown if you stop kneeling. That doesn't mean arguing louder or fighting back harder. It means disengaging entirely from the game. Don't react. Don't explain. Don't try to make them understand. They do understand. They just don't care, unless it breaks their hold. Peterson again. If you refuse to be the target, the weapon loses its meaning. This is psychological Aikido. You don't block their strike. You remove the target altogether, and suddenly they're swinging at air. Use this tip. Create an internal power statement. Write a sentence you will say, out loud or in your mind, every time they try to trigger you. Example, my pain is mine, not your leverage. Or, you don't get to rule here anymore. This isn't woo-woo affirmation. It's a neurological anchor. Every time you say it, you interrupt the trauma loop and build new neural pathways of authority and clarity. Also, stop explaining your boundaries. You don't owe a tyrant a TED Talk. You enforce the line. Not because they'll understand, but because you do. Let's break this down with metaphor. Picture a narcissist like a chess master. Every word, silence, gesture, they're not random. They're moves. Your emotional response? That's their scoreboard. So what happens when you stop playing? The board dies, the game collapses, the crown falls. This is what Stoicism teaches at its core. Composure not for performance, but for principle. Epictetus said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. Your pain is real, but their perception of it, not your job to manage. You don't exist to validate their sense of control. Practice emotional quarantine. Before every interaction, or in recovery from one, ask, am I leaking power here? If yes, pull back, recenter. Respond later, or not at all. The younger version of you felt powerless when hurt. The wiser version now knows, silence can be sovereignty. Detachment can be defiance. Because when your pain becomes invisible to them, it stops being currency. And when you no longer feed their ego, they go hunting elsewhere. Not because they've changed, but because you have. The greatest threat to a narcissist isn't exposure, it's irrelevance. It's when their name no longer burns in your chest. It's when your healing no longer includes them. It's when your peace becomes non-negotiable. Because they don't need your forgiveness. They need your silence. Not the silence of surrender, but of indifference. The silence that says, you no longer live here. The throne is gone. The war is over. And that's real power. The kind no narcissist can touch. Number 3, rewriting the past, how the narcissist edits reality to avoid the mirror. It's not that they forgot what happened, it's that they can't afford to remember it the way you do. The truth threatens their illusion, so they change the story. They don't erase the past, they restructure it. And in that twisted version, you're always wrong. You say, you hurt me. They say, that's not how I remember it. You say, you shouted at me. They say, you're too sensitive. This isn't memory loss, it's strategy. They revise history to escape accountability, not because they're evil geniuses, but because they cannot psychologically survive being the villain in anyone's story, especially their own. Their ego is too fragile, their identity too shallow. So when the facts don't protect them, they rewrite the script. Marcus Aurelius warned, the object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. Narcissists do the opposite. They surround themselves with a reality they invented. It keeps them sane on the surface, but deeply detached underneath. The cost? Everyone else's truth. Take Anthony, 43, from Minnesota. During his marriage, he constantly belittled his wife in public, mocking her opinions, dismissing her input. When she finally confronted him and filed for divorce, he told everyone she overreacted to a few jokes. She never got my sense of humor. At no point did he recall the pattern, the pain, the power imbalance. In his version, he was lighthearted and she was dramatic. He didn't forget. He reframed, and in doing so, he kept his crown. Jordan Peterson explains this psychological maneuver with clarity. The reason people lie to themselves isn't because they don't know the truth, it's because they're afraid of it. To a narcissist, truth is radioactive. It can't just be avoided, it has to be rewritten. And the scarier the truth, the more aggressive the rewrite. This is where gaslighting begins. But it goes deeper. It's not always overt manipulation. It's sometimes self-manipulation. The narcissist genuinely convinces themselves they did nothing wrong. Not because it's logical, but because it's necessary for their self-image to survive. Here's the metaphor. Imagine the narcissist as an amateur editor, constantly cutting and pasting scenes in the film of your shared past. Every line you remember gets redubbed. Every tear you shed gets deleted. Every cruelty they committed is recast as a misunderstanding or your overreaction. And when you point to the real footage, they say, "That's not the version I saw." It's maddening, because the more you try to prove the truth, the more unhinged you seem. And that's the trap. They turn your clarity into your weakness, your memory into a weapon against you, until you question not just what happened, but who you are. So what do? First, stop debating the script. Don't fact-check a fantasy. The more you engage with their version of events, the more you validate the rewrite. They don't want a conversation. They want control of the narrative. Second, anchor yourself in private truth. Write down exactly what happened, not with emotion, but with precision. On July 12th, he said I was worthless in front of our friends. On that night, she called me a failure and laughed when I cried. These are not just memories, they're receipts. And you don't need them to prove anything to them. You need them to protect you from erosion. Peterson again, to speak the truth is to bring order to chaos. That applies inward too. Speak the truth to yourself. Every day. Because in a world where someone else keeps changing the story, your memory becomes your shield. Your clarity becomes your weapon. Your records become your rebellion. Here's a tip. Build a reality folder. Physically or digitally, collect text messages, journal entries, voice memos, any real-time reflections of what happened. Not to dwell, but to preserve accuracy. When the gaslighting intensifies, open that folder. Read your own voice before their voice drowns it out. Now let's go deeper. Why does this rewriting hurt so much? Because memory is identity. When someone alters your shared past, they're not just changing a timeline, they're assaulting your sense of self. It's not just, that never happened. It's you're wrong for thinking it did. And over time, that makes you doubt your instincts, your intelligence, even your sanity. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Being gaslit, rewritten, erased, that is adversity. But it's also your proving ground, not to them, but to you. To hold your reality firm, even when someone tries to wash it away with charm or contempt, that's strength. That's the Stoic way. Let's look at Maya, 38, a teacher from Atlanta. Her ex rewrote every fight they ever had. "You were always yelling," he'd say, after months of her walking on eggshells to avoid conflict. "You never supported me," he claimed after she paid his rent for 2 years. For a long time she tried to defend herself. Then she stopped. She made a timeline, highlighted the facts, printed them, not to show him, but to remind herself. "This happened. I'm not crazy. I was just edited out." That moment, that's when she started to heal. Final practice. Once a week, write down one sentence of truth that no one can steal. Not a paragraph, not a defense, just one hard, undeniable fact. "He lied. She mocked me. I left because I was shrinking." That's how you rebuild your internal compass. One line at a time. So if you've ever sat across from someone who looked you dead in the eye and said, "That's not what happened," while you felt the floor drop under your feet, this is for you. And if you've made it this far, comment 3 below. That simple number tells us this hit something real for you. It tells us you're still listening, still feeling, still rebuilding. That matters. To us, and to others walking the same path. Because you don't need them to admit the truth. You just need to stop letting them rewrite yours. Number 4, the truth that shatters them. Why the narcissist must rewrite reality. There's a specific kind of grief that comes not from being hated, but from being erased. Not violently, quietly, intellectually, slowly. It's when the person who hurt you looks you in the eye and calmly tells you that your version of reality never happened. Not because they forgot, but because they can't afford to remember it the way it truly was. You ache for acknowledgement, not revenge. But even that is too much for them. The truth, your truth, is unbearable in their world. Not because it's wrong, but because it's too accurate. And accuracy threatens the entire illusion they've spent their life trying to protect. The narcissist does not fear conflict. They fear mirrors, real ones that reflect the parts of them they've buried so deep they no longer know where the mask ends and the self begins. Their identity is not built on truth, it's built on performance. A fragile construct of perfection, control, and superiority stitched together by denial. The truth isn't just painful to them, it's fatal. That's why when you speak clearly, they flinch internally, but won't let it show. They smile, they smirk, they shift the subject, they gaslight. Not to manipulate you at first, but to survive the collapse of their false self. Because if they allow even a sliver of truth in, if they admit fault even once, it unravels the whole facade. So they don't bend, they distort. Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." And this is the curse of the narcissist. They already know they are blameless. They already know they are right. So they cannot learn, cannot grow, cannot love in any real sense. Because love requires humility, and humility requires self-awareness. And they have amputated that part of themselves to protect the story. That story, it's holy to them. In it, they're always wise, always justified, always misunderstood, and always the victim when someone calls them out. The moment your pain threatens that narrative, they don't just deny it, they destroy it. They need to believe that you're the unstable one, that you're too emotional, too intense, too irrational. Because if you make sense, they don't. Consider Jeremy, 47, a business owner in San Diego. His employees feared him, his children avoided him, his wife eventually left. And yet, in his mind, he was a provider who never got the respect he deserved. He spoke in martyrdom, wore the victim cloak like armor. When his teenage son once confronted him, calmly, respectfully, with tears in his eyes, Jeremy replied, "That never happened. You're too sensitive." His voice was even, cold, proud. He didn't yell, he erased. And that, for the boy, was the deepest cut. Jordan Peterson explains, "The lies we tell ourselves to maintain comfort become the prison we can't escape." The narcissist lives in that prison. They padded the walls with flattery and falsehoods. They sealed the doors with control, and they call it safety. But it's not safety, it's solitary confinement from reality. That's why they often seem composed, not because they are free, but because they are cut off. Their calmness isn't peace, it's disconnection. Their certainty isn't confidence, it's blindness. And every time you try to show them the truth, it threatens that internal kingdom they rule alone. So they attack, or detach, or worse, smile and say, "That's not how I remember it." And in that moment, you don't just feel hurt, you feel invisible. You could show them screenshots, journals, witnesses, it won't matter. Not because they don't believe you, but because believing you would destroy them. The narcissist's ego is not large, it's brittle. It doesn't absorb feedback, it shatters under it. So they twist the truth until it's unrecognizable, and they sit on top of the rubble, calling it clarity. What can you do? Step 1. Stop trying to be heard by someone who refuses to listen. Their survival depends on not hearing you. The more truthful you are, the more dangerous you become to their illusion. And the more they'll push back, not to hurt you, but to preserve themselves. Step 2. Protect your version of reality like it's sacred, because it is. Keep a private timeline. Journal the facts. Speak to people who were there. Anchor your memory in evidence. When someone tries to convince you that your deepest wounds were imagined, you need receipts for your sanity. Step 3. Grief. Grieve the fact that they will never say sorry and mean it. Grieve the version of them you wanted to be real. Grieve the closure you deserved but will never get. Because only through grief can you stop reaching for something that never existed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "To live a good life, we have the potential for it. If we learn to be indifferent to what makes no difference." Their false version of you, the one they need to believe in so they don't have to face themselves, makes no difference. Let it die. Let them keep their illusion, you keep your peace. Here's one small but powerful exercise. Every time you catch yourself wondering, was it really that bad? Open your journal, your notes, your memory. Read your truth, not theirs. Out loud. Reclaim the narrative. Not to fight them, but to stabilize yourself. Because your memory is not fragile. It is the proof that you survived the rewrite. Number 5. The glass crown. Why the narcissist pretends nothing happened. There's something colder than cruelty. It's the blank face of someone who knows they've hurt you, but refuses to acknowledge it. No apology, no recognition, just the heavy silence of someone clinging to an identity too fragile to crack. They don't look away because they don't know. They look away because knowing would ruin them. The narcissist doesn't need truth, they need confirmation. Their entire sense of self rests on one shaky foundation: how they appear to others. Not who they are, how they're perceived. Strong, flawless, always in control. Any admission of wrongdoing threatens to shatter that image. So they build a kingdom of denial, and they rule it like nothing ever happened. You see the damage. They see a test. You feel the fracture. They feel the need to pose harder. Because in their internal world, being wrong is worse than being cruel. It's not a moral failure, it's an identity death. Jordan Peterson writes, "When your identity is made of fragile things, even small truths feel like extinction." That's the narcissist. Their ego isn't steel, it's glass, polished and elevated, but one truth away from collapse. So instead of facing reality, they double down on illusion. Instead of apologizing, they perform. They don't correct the mistake, they erase the record. Let's take Scott, 39, a regional manager from Florida. After being caught lying about sabotaging a coworker, he didn't flinch. He just pivoted. "I was protecting the company. They misunderstood me. I had no choice." His tone, calm, his posture, upright. His story, rewritten. Even when shown emails that proved he'd manipulated the situation, he held firm. "I don't remember it that way," he said. And in that moment, the truth didn't disappear. It just became inconvenient. This isn't ignorance, it's strategy. Marcus Aurelius said, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." But the narcissist never truly lives. Because living requires self-reflection. It requires error, vulnerability, transformation. The narcissist can't allow that. They live to uphold a mask, and the weight of that mask makes them hollow. They wear composure like armor, but not stoic composure, the kind born from discipline and clarity. No, this is defensive composure, a face trained to reveal nothing because truth would cost too much. Not in reputation, in identity. In their world, perception is survival. If others see them as wrong, flawed, human, the illusion crumbles. And without that illusion, they don't know who they are. That's why they react with stone-faced detachment when called out. Why they ignore evidence. Why they ghost. Not to protect you, to protect the mirror they live inside. The irony? Their silence isn't strength. It's panic, painted to look like peace. They act unbothered, but inside they're running a damage control operation, making sure no crack shows. Their calm after betrayal isn't composure. It's emotional concealment. A stage performance rehearsed to the point of automation. And here's where you get trapped. You think their calm means they don't care. You wonder, did it mean nothing to them? You internalize the lack of reaction as proof that you overreacted. But it's not your reaction that's the problem. It's their entire personality structure, built to avoid accountability at all costs. So what do? First, stop assuming silence equals peace. It doesn't. In their world, silence is strategy. It protects the performance. Don't read it as emotional mastery. It's just a defense system. Refined, rehearsed, hollow. Second, reclaim your reality. Don't wait for them to admit what they did. They won't. Not because you're not worth it, but because their survival depends on pretending it didn't happen. Keep your own record. Talk to someone who witnessed the truth. Journal the facts without seeking their validation. Peterson again, if your life is built on lies, your soul will demand revenge, and you'll see it. Narcissists implode over time. The more they deny, the more brittle they become. The crown they protect so desperately is made of glass, and reality doesn't negotiate with glass. Here's your practice. Write a sentence that starts with, "Even though they didn't admit it, I still know." Fill in the truth. Even though they didn't admit it, I still know they lied. I still know I was manipulated. Say it. Read it. Reclaim it. That's your throne, not theirs. Because in the end, the narcissist didn't stay quiet because you were wrong. They stayed quiet because your truth was a threat. And when someone needs illusion more than intimacy, they will always choose to protect the mask, even if it costs them every real connection they ever had. Because you don't need their crown to be whole. You just need your voice to be real. Number 6, the emotional bill you keep paying, and they never will. It starts small, a subtle dismissal, a sigh when you express how you feel, a cold shrug when you need comfort. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself you're being too emotional, but over time that nothing compounds. And one day you wake up emotionally overdrawn, exhausted, numb, and somehow ashamed for even needing connection. This is what happens when you orbit around a narcissist. Your feelings stop mattering, not because they forget, but because your emotions don't serve their image. And if something doesn't serve the image, they discard it, even when it's you. The narcissist's world is a stage. Every interaction is a performance. And in that play, there's only room for one star. Your role? Supporting cast, backup character, maybe even the emotional punching bag that makes them look calm and above it all. And when you ask for something they can't use, comfort, empathy, a real response, they see it not as a request, but as a threat to the script. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But what if the outside event is someone who constantly invalidates your mind? What if your pain, when voiced, is met with rolled eyes, sarcasm, or stony silence? You begin to question if your emotions are real. You begin to apologize for your needs. And that's when the real cost begins. Let's talk about Michelle, 35, from Denver. She spent 4 years in a relationship with someone who never yelled, never hit, but left her constantly confused and emotionally empty. Anytime she cried, he'd say, "You're always so dramatic." When she tried to talk about a problem, he'd sigh, "Not this again." Over time, she stopped bringing things up, stopped asking, stopped feeling safe. Friends noticed she'd become more quiet, more withdrawn, more unsure of herself. She didn't realize until therapy that she wasn't just tired, she was emotionally bankrupt. Jordan Peterson explains this erosion well. If you are around people who make you feel weak and confused, and your instincts scream at you that something's wrong, listen. Narcissists don't shout, they drain. Slowly. They make you doubt your instincts, minimize your voice, and defer your reality to theirs. It's not an attack, it's a slow, calculated removal of your emotional center. Imagine your emotional health as a bank account. Every time you share vulnerability with someone safe, your account grows. Trust, connection, security. But with a narcissist, every conversation, every disagreement, every unmet need is a withdrawal. The interest rates are brutal, and no matter how much you give, they never deposit anything back. One day, you hit zero, and they still expect more. The Stoics never said, "Don't feel." They said, "Don't be enslaved by what you can't control." In Letters to Lucilius, Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." But being in a narcissistic environment shifts your imagination. You start to see your own emotions as burdens. You start to believe you're too much. And that is a form of suffering as real as any wound. So what can you do? First, recognize the pattern. If your emotional experiences are regularly minimized, redirected, or punished with silence, you're not being dramatic, you're being trained to shut up. And that is not love, that is control. Second, track your emotional balance. Ask yourself weekly, do I feel seen, heard, grounded? If the answer is consistently no, it's time to pull back. Not from feeling, but from performing for someone who doesn't care. Third, restore communication with yourself. Create a 5-minute daily check-in. Ask, what did I feel today that I didn't express? Why? What do I need more of? The goal is to reconnect with your emotional compass, the one they've tried to twist. Let's look at Eric, 42, from Seattle. After years working under a narcissistic boss who gave praise only in public and criticism only in private, Eric developed anxiety and lost sleep. He started believing he was failing constantly, even though his performance was solid. Only after a mental breakdown did he realize it wasn't about his output. It was about being in a system that punished emotional truth. He quit. He now works at a smaller firm where he's paid less but respected more. "I sleep again," he said, "and I laugh. I hadn't noticed I stopped laughing." Here's a truth no one says aloud. The narcissist's silence is not absence, it's a message. It says, your emotions are an inconvenience. Clean them up before you bring them in here. And the longer you accept that, the more fluent you become in self-abandonment. Practice saying this to yourself. I do not exist to decorate someone else's emotional image. Your anger, your sadness, your confusion, they are not flaws, they are signals. When you express them and someone recoils, That's not your cue to go silent. That's your cue to leave the room. Because you are not exhausting, you are awake. And the cost of staying around someone who sees your emotions as currency they never intend to repay is too damn high. Because your feelings are not too much. They are the bill they refuse to pay. Number 7, the apology that never comes, because it would cost them the throne. You don't just want an apology. You want a moment of truth, a flicker of honesty, a break in the wall where they finally say, I see what I did, I hurt you, I was wrong. But with a narcissist, that moment never comes. And if it does, it's wrapped in conditions, cloaked in deflection, and sterilized of all accountability. They don't say, I'm sorry I betrayed you. They say, I'm sorry if you felt hurt. They don't say, I crossed a line. They say, you misunderstood what I meant. This isn't remorse, it's management. They're not repairing the wound, they're protecting the crown. To apologize sincerely is to kneel. To say, for a moment, you have the right to judge me. And for a narcissist, that is unbearable, because the second you have the right to judge them, you threaten their illusion of superiority. You place yourself on equal ground, or worse, above them. That's not an apology to them, that's a loss of power. The narcissist's self-image isn't just inflated, it's sacred, it's untouchable, and anything that threatens it must be neutralized, even if that means rephrasing guilt into politeness. Sorry you feel that way isn't an apology, it's a non-apology, a verbal sedative meant to silence your pain without them ever having to taste humility. Seneca once wrote, it is a noble thing to admit fault. It is the start of virtue. But the narcissist doesn't want virtue. They want control. Virtue to them is weakness, because it means giving someone else the power to say, that was wrong. And in their world, they cannot be wrong, ever. Take Lauren, 34, from Michigan. Her partner emotionally neglected her for years, missed milestones, dismissed her needs, shut down during conflict. When she finally broke down and begged for a conversation, he stared coldly and said, I'm sorry you feel I've let you down. She thanked him at the time. Months later in therapy, she realized he never took responsibility. He just passed the emotional burden back to her. Jordan Peterson warns of this. True accountability means you recognize that your actions affect others, and that matters. But narcissists can't tolerate the second half of that sentence. That matters. Because if it matters, they're not the center anymore. And if they're not the center, who are they? Here's what you must understand. A real apology isn't just words. It's hierarchy shifting. It says, you have value. Your pain counts. I answer to that. And the narcissist won't go there. Not because they're strong, but because they're terrified of surrendering control, even for a second. So instead of I was wrong, you get, I didn't mean it. Instead of I caused this, you get, let's move on. And if you push for more, they withdraw, blame, or accuse you of being too emotional. Because in their logic, if they didn't intend harm, they're innocent. But intention doesn't erase impact. Only humility can do that. Here's a metaphor. The narcissist stands on a stage they built. Their identity is the script. Every interaction is rehearsed. When you ask for a real apology, you're not just asking for a line change, you're asking them to step off the stage and into real life. That's too raw, too risky, too real. So they stay in character. And you keep waiting for something human in a performance designed to protect the inhuman. What can you do? First, accept that a real apology may never come. Not because you don't deserve it, but because they're incapable of giving it without collapsing their persona. That's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their fragility. Second, write the apology yourself. Not to let them off the hook, but to free yourself from the loop. Write, I'm sorry you were hurt. I'm sorry they made you question your right to feel. I'm sorry you waited for closure from someone who couldn't face their own shadow. Then read it aloud. That's your healing, not their admission. Third, practice this sentence. I no longer require validation from those who fear vulnerability. Use it when the silence feels heavy, when you start wondering if they were right, when you start thinking maybe you should have done more. Say it again and again, until your nervous system learns their lack of apology is not your failure. It's their fear. Peterson again, there's nothing noble in lying to avoid discomfort. Growth demands the confrontation of truth, especially when it stings. Narcissists dodge that sting, but you don't have to. And if this hit you, If you've spent months, maybe years waiting for a real "I'm sorry" that never came, comment 7 below. That number says, I'm not alone. I've seen the empty apologies, I've walked through the silence, and I'm done waiting for someone else to validate what I already know, because their silence doesn't clear them. And your pain doesn't lie, it just deserves to be heard by you first. Number 8. The imitation of empathy. Why the narcissist can't truly care. You cried and they stayed still. You explained your pain and they nodded, like they were taking notes, not feeling with you. You broke open and they offered a hollow phrase. That must be hard. No warmth, no shift, no real presence. Just words shaped like comfort, spoken from behind glass. It wasn't that they didn't respond, it's that the response was empty. Not absent. Manufactured. This is the most devastating truth. The narcissist can mimic care, but they do not feel it. What looks like compassion is often calculation. What feels like support is often performance. Their empathy is a costume worn when necessary, dropped when no longer useful. You keep waiting for the real person behind the mask, but the mask is the person. You might think this is heartlessness, but it's deeper than that. It's structural. Clinical psychology shows that narcissists exhibit a specific deficit in what's called affective empathy, the ability to actually feel what others feel. They may possess cognitive empathy. They can understand what you're going through and even describe it. But there's no internal resonance, no shared pulse, no ache that travels across the space between you. It's like playing music to someone who's deaf. They can nod to the rhythm, but they'll never hear the song. Seneca said, "We are waves of the same sea." But the narcissist lives in a separate ocean. They know people hurt. They just don't care, unless that hurt threatens to affect how others perceive them. Then, and only then, do they respond. Not to ease your suffering, but to protect their image. Take Jacob, 45, a successful architect in New Jersey. His partner was hospitalized after a car accident. Jacob showed up, brought flowers, even posted a heartfelt caption on Instagram. But in private, he was cold, impatient, dismissive of her anxiety. When she cried, he said, "Don't start this now." When she asked for reassurance, he rolled his eyes. Later, he told friends she just wanted attention. He did everything expected, but nothing real. Jordan Peterson explains this phenomenon well. People who cannot regulate their own emotions often fail to recognize them in others. The narcissist is emotionally amputated. They severed their connection to vulnerability long ago, often in response to trauma. And now, the pain of others doesn't activate their heart. It threatens their control. So they respond mechanically, formally, coldly. Their version of compassion is conditional. They offer sympathy when there's an audience, when it boosts their image, when it keeps you attached. But when you need it most, in the private, messy, inconvenient moments, they disappear. Or worse, they resent you for needing anything at all. Here's the metaphor. Imagine standing in a burning house, screaming for help. The narcissist stands outside, watching. They wave, smile, maybe even record a video about how much they care. But they never walk inside. They never risk feeling the heat. Because real empathy burns, and they are terrified of catching fire. So what do? Step 1. Stop confusing performance for presence. Just because they say the right words doesn't mean they hold the right heart. You are not cold for noticing the difference. You are clear. Step 2. Reclaim your emotional expectations. You are not too sensitive for needing compassion. You are not needy for wanting to be met in your pain. You are human. And wanting connection is not a weakness, it's evidence you still feel. Peterson again. To attend properly to others, you must first be properly rooted in yourself. Stop seeking emotional nourishment from someone who treats your pain like background noise. Turn inward, and then outward, toward those who feel, not just function. Try this. The next time you're in emotional distress, observe who shows up. Not just who answers, but who actually feels. Who holds space, who doesn't rush you, who doesn't correct, fix, or judge. That is your tribe. That is your mirror. That is what real empathy looks like. Because you're not crazy for noticing the absence of real care. You're not broken for needing what they can't give. You're just awake in a world full of people wearing masks. Conclusion? The crown is hollow, but the damage is real. In the end, what breaks you isn't the betrayal. It's the indifference that follows. The smirk where there should have been sorrow. The The polished phrases that sound like apologies but don't touch the truth. The eerie calm of someone who hurt you and walked away without a scratch, while you limped through weeks, months, years, trying to name what just happened. What you were up against wasn't an argument. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a system. A persona engineered to avoid one thing at all costs: accountability. Because to admit they hurt you would mean admitting they could. And to someone whose identity is built on the illusion of superiority, that kind of truth isn't just uncomfortable, it's lethal. That's why they rewrite the past, impersonate empathy, dodge apologies, and dismiss your pain like an inconvenience. It's not because they're stable, it's because they're terrified. And so, instead of facing their reflection, they make sure you question your own. That's not strength, it's cowardice in a tailored suit. It's a throne built on denial, a crown made of glass. But what about you? You're still standing, still questioning, still aching. But here's the twist. Your pain, unlike theirs, means you're still real. You still feel, you still care. And that, in a world of narcissistic frostbite, is a sign of unbroken humanity. That's not weakness, that's depth. The Stoics never taught us to become numb. They taught us to become unshakable, to face the truth, even when it scorches. To walk through fire and come out quieter, wiser, not hollow, but forged. And maybe, just maybe, you're not here to destroy the narcissist. You're here to stop letting their dysfunction define your worth. So here's what you do now. Like this video if even one line made your heart say, "That's it." Share it with someone who's been quietly unraveling under someone else's emotional exile. Subscribe to Victory Stoic. We're not just building content, we're building clarity, together. And drop a comment with one of the following. Comment 1 if this message struck a chord with you. Comment 0 if it didn't quite land. We value that honesty too. Even better, share your story. The one you thought no one would believe. The one that made you question your sanity. The one where someone pretended not to care and you had to care twice as hard to survive. That truth? It's gold, and someone else here needs it more than you think. Thank you for staying until the end. For listening, for refusing to go numb. This isn't just a video, this is the start of a rebellion, not against them but for you. Stoic, awake, whole. We'll see you in the next one.